go to orders of the day. Orders of the day. The member for Elmwood Transcona is rising on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising today on a point of order with respect to the main estimates 2018-2019. Several points, in fact, Mr. Speaker. Some of those points will pertain to those estimates as a totality, and other points of order will pertain specifically to the so-called budget implementation vote, or Treasury Board Secretariat Vote 40, which I will simply refer to as Vote 40 throughout the course of my argument. At the outset, I think it's important to say, Mr. Speaker, that I support the stated objectives of the President of the Treasury Board with respect to reforming the estimates process and having better alignment between the budget document, the estimates documents, and public accounts. But that said, Mr. Speaker, those goals will not be realized if for every step forward we take 2 steps back. Moreover, we can have better information and better alignment between those documents without undermining the financial oversight role that Parliament plays with respect to the government, and it's in respect to that important role that I rise on a point of order today. And I think it's also important to say that these arguments will be procedural in nature. They're not about the substance of what's in the estimates, Mr. Speaker, and pointing out the deficiencies in the way that the government has chosen to seek funding for their new budget initiatives is not the same as opposing the substantive measures. There are some positive measures in the budget, but the ends cannot justify the means in this case, Mr. Speaker. Our duty as parliamentarians to oversee government spending does not begin with the programs we don't like and end with those we do. Just as you serve the whole House and are charged with upholding the rights and privileges of the House despite whatever partisan affiliation you may have had prior to your election as Speaker. The first respect in which I believe this year's main estimates are deficient is in respect to their form, Mr. Speaker. In House of Commons Procedure and Practice, 3rd edition, we read that, quote, "The business of supply is the process by which the government asks Parliament to appropriate the funds required to meet its financial obligations and to implement programs already approved by Parliament." The government initiates its request in the House of Commons because, as stated in Standing Order 80 sub 1, quote, "All aids and supplies granted to the Sovereign by the Parliament of Canada are the sole gift of the House of Commons, and all bills for granting such aids and supplies ought to begin with the House, and it is the undoubted right of the House to direct, limit, and appoint in all such bills the ends, purposes, considerations, conditions, limitations, and qualifications of such grants, which are not alterable by the Senate." In order to accomplish that task, according to House of Commons Procedure and Practice, 3rd edition, the Crown, acting on the advice of its responsible ministers, transmits to the House of Commons the government's projected annual expenditures, or estimates, for parliamentary scrutiny and approval. Further to that, we are to understand that, quote, "During the legislative phase of the supply process," that is, Mr. Speaker, "the House considers and votes on the government's proposed annual spending plans, the main and supplementary estimates, and the legislation or appropriation bills needed to authorize all consequential withdrawals from the Consolidated Revenue Fund." In other words, Mr. Speaker, the government is meant to receive the authority to spend money out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund from the House of Commons on the basis of the information it provides to members of the House through the estimates documents. As such, the form and content of the estimates has been contested over the last 150 years, and the rules and procedures of this place require certain information to be included in the estimates in order that members of this House are able to assess the spending plans of government prior to voting authority for expenditures of public money. Requirements of the estimates are described in the House of Commons Procedure and Practice. Quote, "The main estimates provide a breakdown by department and program of planned government spending for the upcoming fiscal year. The estimates are expressed as a series of votes, or resolutions, which summarize the estimated financial requirements in a particular expenditure category, such as operations, capital, or grants. The votes are expressed in dollar amounts, the total of which, once agreed to, should satisfy all the budgetary requirements of a departmental agency in that category, with the exception of any expenditures provided for under other statutory authority. In response to complaints that government estimates did not include sufficient information for parliamentarians to properly assess the integrity of government spending plans, the estimates were modified in order to include departmental plans that include more detailed information about current and anticipated departmental initiatives. This practice dates back as far back as 1981 and is so integral to the estimates process that the departmental plans are in fact considered to be Part 3 of the estimates. I will spare members of the House a lengthy citation by referring them to Chapter 18 of House and Commons Procedure and Practice for a historical survey of the estimates and the incorporation of departmental plans into the estimates. Departmental plans are considered to be so important to parliamentarians' understanding of the estimates that a given department's departmental plan is automatically referred to the committee considering its departmental estimate. The authority for that comes from Standing Order 81 sub 7, which I quote, "When main estimates are referred to a standing committee, the committee shall also be empowered to consider and report upon the expenditure plans and priorities in future fiscal years of the departments and agencies whose main estimates are before it. Any report on plans and priorities of a department or agency shall be deemed referred to the appropriate standing committee immediately after it is laid upon the table." Main Estimates 2018-19 fails to meet these requirements of a properly constituted estimates. It defies the well-established practice and reasonable expectation on the part of members of this House that the estimates will include the information they need to make a considered judgment with respect to the government spending plan before giving authority for the spending. Moreover, it violates the spirit of Standing Order 81 sub 7, a standing order meant to ensure that members of this House have all the relevant information available to them with respect to the government spending plans before authorize that spending as part of the estimates process. These estimates do that by supplanting Part 3 of the estimates with the budget document for all of the government's new budgetary initiatives, valued at over $7 billion and all lumped together under Treasury Board Vote 40. There is no requirement that government present a budget in any given year, and there is no mechanism by which that document is automatically referred to committees for study. Nevertheless, we are being referred to that document, not any document in the estimates themselves, to get whatever detail the government is prepared to offer about their proposed new initiatives. To give a sense of the magnitude of the spending contemplated, consider that of the roughly $276 billion of expenditures forecast in the main estimates, only $83 billion actually stays with the government for its operating and capital expenditures. $7 billion is being requested under Vote 40. That's 8.5% of the federal government's own operating and capital expenditures. Together with the contingency fund of $750 million under Treasury Board Vote 5, the government is asking for $7.8 billion, or about 9.4% of its actual budget, without providing the appropriate supporting information under Part 3 of the estimates. While these are impressive figures, Mr. Speaker, Speaker Jerome made the point in a ruling on December 7, 1977, that when it comes to deciding whether an item in the estimates is in order or not, quote, whether the amount is $1 or $1 billion makes no difference to the chair, end quote. By extension, it does not matter whether the sum is over $7 billion either. As Speaker Lamoureux stated on December 10, 1973, with respect to these matters, quote, the chair has to make a ruling on principle, end quote. To confirm that the government intended to supplant Part 3 of the main estimates with the budget document, such as it is, I would direct Your Honour to the testimony of Ms. Marie Lemay, Deputy Minister of the Department of Public Works and Government Services at the Government Operations and Estimates Committee on May 10, 2018, in response to questioning by the member for Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke. So I quote from the committee testimony, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member, I want to follow up some of the questions that were raised earlier by the member for Edmonton West about Table A211. I want to try and clear things up a little. There are things that are listed there for PSPC, $653 million worth of spending, and for shared services, $289 million of spending. That's nearly $1 billion. Are those in the main estimates? Ms. Marie Lemay responded, those were announced in the budget and are not in the main estimates. And I would say, Mr. Speaker, that that's despite the government seeking appropriation for funds for those measures under Treasury Board Vote 40. I would further draw your attention to a number of examples in the documents themselves, which I do not pretend is by any means an exhaustive list, but merely a sampling of instances where authority is being requested for grants that are not described in Part 3 or any other part of the estimates. Take, for example, the item Ensuring Security and Prosperity in the Digital Age. In the annex of the main estimates that proposes certain allocations out of Treasury Board Vote 40, this item is mentioned on 8 separate occasions. The suggested allocations under this item are as follows. Communication Security Establishment, over $42 million. Department of Employment and Social Development, $2.7 million. Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, $3.3 million. Department of Industry, $4.6 million. Department of Natural Resources, $2.2 million. Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, $5,471,000. Royal Canadian Mounted Police, $38 million, $225,000. Standard Council of Canada, $1.6 million. Of the 8 departments or agencies in question, only 3 bothered to mention digital initiatives at all in their departmental estimates. The Departmental Plan for Employment and Social Development on page 54, for example, Mr. Speaker, and I think you'll see that this is not exactly clear given the subject heading in Vote 40 and what occurs in the departmental estimates, how this funding is supposed to line up. So I quote from page 54 of the ESDC Departmental Plan. ESDC is developing and implementing a modern IT infrastructure that enables digital services, enables effective, efficient, and timely availability of information, and ensures a secure technology environment. This will be delivered through initiatives to update and modernize the desktop computing environment, upgrade older server operating systems through the Application Portfolio Management Initiative, as well as through establishing an enterprise architecture program to deliver on IT-enabled business information, and by supporting ESDC in delivering on benefits delivery modernization of the Service Transformation Plan, commitments to be delivered in the longer term. How that relates exactly to digital security is not exactly clear, Mr. Speaker. The Departmental Plan for Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness on page 22 says the Department will strengthen its relationships with information management and information technology services partners and maintain its ongoing participation in government-wide enterprise and modernization initiatives, including the review and implementation of the new Treasury Board digital policy, the promotion of more accessible and open information via open government by design and default, the development of interoperability standards, the adoption of government enterprise systems such as GCDoc, GCSI, CTSN, and others. End quote. While the RCMP departmental plan, and I won't quote at length from that, Mr. Speaker, does provide considerably more information, that still leaves 5 of the 8 departments or agencies that did not include information on these proposed authorities in the estimates. Perhaps they felt they did not need to because the vote seeking authority for that spending actually appears as a Treasury Board vote, so they may have thought they didn't need to include it in their own departmental estimates. If so, one might think that Treasury Board departmental plan would provide details for the over 200 items covered under Vote 40, but alas, Mr. Speaker, it does not. Perhaps Treasury Board felt it did not need to provide those details because they appear in the budget document, but the budget document is not part of the estimates, which is in essence my point, Mr. Speaker. Unlike Part 3 of the estimates, it is not automatically referred on to committees for their consideration as part of the estimate study. As a second example, consider the item, a new intellectual property strategy. That item appears in Vote 40 Annex in the Vote 40 Annex under 5 separate departments or agencies, but the new strategy is mentioned in only 1 departmental plan, the Departmental Plan for the Department of Industry. The Department of Industry requests $6.2 million for this, the Copyright Board $600,000, Courts Administration Service
Order. 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 I'm going to be asking in a moment the Honourable Member for Elmwood-Transcona to give me an idea of how much time he expects to need for presenting the argument he's making on this point of order. But I also want to refer him, make him aware, if he's not already perhaps, of what's said at page 97 of Beauchesne's, which says the member may interrupt and lay the point in question concisely before the Speaker. This should be done as soon as an irregularity is perceived in the proceedings which are engaging the attention of the House. Now, in this case, he should know, of course, he probably does, that Vote 40 is not before the House, it's in fact before the committee. So that's a fundamental problem. Perhaps you could give me an idea of how much longer he expects to need to make his presentation. As I said, normally the point of order is raised in a very concise fashion, and I would, he's had about 10 minutes already, which is fine, but I would expect him to wrap up in the next several minutes. The Honourable Member for The honourable member for Elgin-Twiscona has a point of order, and so I'm afraid I can't let someone else interrupt his point of order. The honourable member for Elgin-Twiscona.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will endeavour to try and give you some sense of how long it will take to make this point, although I would say it is an important point, and I think it should be made the full point ought to be made. And I would like to be able to take the time to show you why it is that members of Parliament are not satisfied that the appropriate information is in the estimates. And I would say that that's relevant, and it's an essential part of the argument, Mr. Speaker. But before I try and give you a sense of the amount of time that it will take for that point of order, further to your point about the timing of these points of order, I too would like to quote from House of Commons Procedure and Practice, where it says that speakers have often indicated that, and this is about points of order on the estimates specifically and not the general point with respect to points of orders that you just rightly raised. It says speakers have often indicated that members should take the initiative in bringing to the attention of the chair any procedural irregularities with regard to the estimates. They have also repeatedly asked that members raise questions about the procedural acceptability of estimates as early as possible so that the chair has time to give due consideration to these points. I would also refer you to statements made on this very subject by other speakers, particularly a statement from March 22nd, 1977, where the speaker said, "It cannot be expected that points of order would be raised at the time of tabling or referral of the estimates, nor can it be left to the last moment of consideration of the supply bill itself, if the administration of the House is to be expected to produce for consideration by honourable members the actual supply bill before the votes are taken." In other words, Mr. Speaker, if we were to wait until all of this were done at committee, it would put the House on the spot. It would put you on the spot, because if it was found that there was an important problem with the estimates, the House would then have far less time to be able to find a solution to those problems. The government, unless it is compelled by the force of my argument, I hope it will be, I do find these to be compelling arguments, but if it's not, it may want to respond. And I think it's reasonable to give the government as much time as possible in order to prepare its own response, as well as the other parties.
The honourable member for Elgin-Twiscona still hasn't given me an indication, as I asked for, of how long I expected to need for this. I indicated that I was certainly open to hear a few more minutes, but there's so much detail that it becomes a question of whether this is really more debate than a point of order. When he's presenting so much in terms of argument, I would expect him to wrap up in the next few minutes. The honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would say, though, that given that the crux of the argument in this particular case is that certain essential information is not being provided in the estimates, I think it's important to show that that information is not provided in the estimates, and I think it's also relevant that the government seems to think that information was provided by referring to documents outside of the estimates process. So while I do hear your concern and appreciate your concern, Mr. Speaker, I do feel strongly that this information is quite relevant to a technical point of order about procedure. It's not substantive debate. It's trying to demonstrate for you and for your benefit and for the benefit of all members of the House that certain information is not in the estimates. If I'm going to make the case that the estimates aren't in their proper form, I have to be able to demonstrate that, and that's going to require talking about some detail of the estimates. So I'm making every effort not to debate the substantive merit of those measures, and I believe I'm within order on that, Mr. Speaker. So in terms of how long it's going to take exactly as long as it does to present what I believe to be the essential information for this point of order. So I would continue to say that perhaps these departments and agencies felt they didn't need to address the new intellectual property strategy in their departmental plan because the vote seeking authority for that spending is under the Treasury Board department. I think that's quite relevant, Mr. Speaker, because we've had departments say at committee that because it's under vote 40, they don't have the information in their departmental plan, and because it's not in the departmental plan of the Treasury Board, it's effectively not in the estimates. And that's why I think it's important for you to hear that information, Mr. Speaker. Because as I mentioned before, the Treasury Board departmental plan does not attempt to provide information for those 200 items. We're led to believe the government believes it's sufficient to have discussed these measures in the budget document, but for the reasons I outlined before, they rightly belong in the estimates, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, the very wording proposed for the appropriations act for that vote refers directly to the budget, Mr. Speaker. So I'm going to quote that vote for you to show that the government is invoking the budget document as opposed to the estimates documents. That vote says, authority granted to the Treasury Board to supplement in support of initiatives announced in the budget of February 27, 2018, any appropriation for the fiscal year. And in order to respect your consideration of time, Mr. Speaker, I'll dispense with quoting the rest of the language of the vote, because the important phrase here is initiatives announced in the budget of February 27, 2018, a phrase which clearly suggests that in the opinion of the government, an announcement in the budget is sufficient basis for granting spending authority, notwithstanding the procedures and standing orders of this House. I submit to you, Mr. Speaker, that that is wrong. Members of this House should expect that the information they need to evaluate the spending plans of the government will be included in the estimates themselves.
Order. I thank the honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona. I think I've heard enough on the subject. The fact is that this is a matter that is before a committee. The House cannot presume what the committee will do, whether it will vote to pass the estimates or to not pass the estimates until it comes back before the House. It's not properly before the House. It's not a matter that I think I can consider in terms of this point of order until that occurs. But I thank the member for this point of order, and I see that the honourable opposition House leader is rising on a point of order.
I do have a point of order on this, Mr. Speaker. These rules governing the main estimates were only adopted in June of last year, and as you know, whether new rules are adopted, when they're adopted, clarification is often required. We're not talking about some of the rules that the Liberals dumped on us last year, like their approach to prorogation and omnibus bills. We're talking about the financial role of Parliament. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know that some may be impatient in this House, but I want to remind everyone through you that it took centuries to get where we are today, and spending a little bit of time on this important topic on a Friday is not unreasonable. At page 114 of Joseph Redlick's The Procedure of the House of Commons, a study of its history and present form, it says, the whole of law of finance, and consequently the whole British Constitution, is grounded upon one fundamental principle laid down at the very onset of English parliamentary history and secured by 300 years of mingled conflict with the Crown and peaceful growth. All taxes and public burdens imposed upon the nation for purpose of state, whatsoever their nature, must be granted by the representative of the citizens and taxpayer, i.e., by Parliament, unquote. On page 404 and 405 of the 4th edition of Bernard's Parliamentary Procedure and Practice, published in 1916, it states, all the checks and guards which the wisdom of English parliamentarians has imposed on the course of centuries upon public expenditures now exists in their full force in the Parliament of the Dominion, unquote. Mr. Speaker, I think it could be seen as scandalous that what took centuries to develop can't be given a little bit of time on a quiet Friday. I am listening, as we all are, intently to my colleague from the NDP. I want to hear the arguments out. I think he has been very careful to not engage in debate. This, Mr. Speaker, is an argument that we want to hear. There are many of my colleagues who have been engaged on this file for some time, have brought it forward, and then no doubt they want to return to the House and continue this debate with their own submissions. The government proposed a change promising a more complete and accurate main estimate in exchange for less time to scrutinize them at committee. The President of the Treasury Board came through with his promise of less scrutiny at committee, but has not provided accurate and complete information to Parliament. Further, Vote 40 in this year's main estimates is nothing more than a $7 billion slush fund that will allow the Liberals to move money around wherever they want without parliamentary approval. The Parliamentary Budget Officer, in his latest report on the main estimates, had this to say. The government delayed tabling the 2018-19 main estimates by several weeks to ensure better alignment between the budget and estimates. While the government has included a new budget implementation vote for $7 billion, the initiatives to be funded through this vote are not reflected in the departmental plans. Hence, there remains a lack of alignment between the budget initiative and planned results. The government's approach to funding Budget 2018 initiatives provides parliamentarians with information that only marginally supports their deliberations and places fewer controls around the money it approves. With respect to the former, virtually none of the money requested in the new budget implementation vote has undergone scrutiny through the standard Treasury Board submission process, which has indicated by the government is to ensure resources are directed to the programs and activities that remain government priorities and achieve values for money. With respect to the latter, it's unclear that the proposed vote wording would restrict the government to fund each budget 2018 measure in the amount set out in the budget plan for each department and agency, rather than changing the allocation across any initiative mentioned in Budget 2018. As I said, Mr. Speaker, some of my colleagues serving on the Estimate Committee may want to weigh in on this important discussion at a later date, but I believe in the meantime we must hear from the member the full submission on this important topic and the matter that is before the House right now. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Opposition House Leader for her intervention. No, as I indicated, order. The member for Carleton will take his seat as the Speaker is standing. Order. As I indicated, I have heard enough on this subject. The matter is not before the House. It is before the committee, and I'm not prepared to hear any more on this subject. I thank honourable members. Orders of the day.
Government orders.
Topic. Honourable member for Carleton.
Yes, Mr. Chair, it is the custom of this House that chairs recognize points of order when they are called. I called a point of order before you went into orders of the day, and I know that you clearly heard that point of order because you referenced me while I was making it. So I'm going to proceed to making that point of order, and that is going to be that point of order begins prior to the call to the orders of the day. It does relate to a matter that is before the House of Commons. Vote 40 is a matter before the House of Commons. The House of Commons has delegated to committees the study of estimates. That matter is before
order. It appears to me very clearly that the member is engaging in the same point of order that's already been dealt with. I will examine the arguments that have been made and will come back to the House in due course. Orders of the day have already been called. The members for Elmwood, Transcona and Carleton will come to order. And members will take their seats. As the Speaker, only one person stands at a time. Order. Order. If the member for Elmwood, Transcona wishes to be heard in the near future, he will desist and sit down. The member for Elmwood, Transcona will take his seat. Ms. Chager, seconded by Ms. McKenna, moves that notwithstanding any standing order or usual practice of the House, commencing upon the adoption of this order, concluding on Friday, June 22nd, 2018, A, on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, the ordinary hour of daily adjournment shall be 12 a.m., except that it shall be 10 p.m. on a day when a debate pursuant to Standing Order 52 or 53.1 is to take place. B, subject to paragraph E, when a reported division is requested in respect of a debatable motion, including any division arising as a consequence of the application of Standing Order 61-2 or Standing Order 78, but not including any division in relation to business of supply or arising as a consequence of an order made pursuant to Standing Order 57-1 before 2 p.m. on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, it shall stand deferred until the conclusion of oral questions at that day's sitting, or 2 after 2 p.m. on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, or at any time on a Friday, it shall stand deferred until the conclusion of oral questions at the next sitting day that is not a Friday. C, notwithstanding Standing Order 45-6 and paragraph B of this order, no recorded division requested after 2 p.m. on Thursday, June 21, 2018, or at any time on Friday, June 22nd, 2018, shall be deferred, except for any recorded division, which under the standing orders will be deferred to immediately before the time provided for private members' business on Wednesday, September 19, 2018. D, the time provided for government orders shall not be extended pursuant to Standing Order 45-7.1 or Standing Order 67.12. E, when a recorded division which would have ordinarily been deemed deferred to immediately before the time provided for private members' business on a Wednesday governed by this order is requested, the said division is deemed to have been deferred until the conclusion of oral questions of the same Wednesday. F, any recorded division which at the time of the adoption of this order stands deferred to immediately before the time provided for private members' business on the Wednesday immediately following the adoption of this order shall be deemed to stand deferred to the conclusion of oral questions on the same Wednesday. G, a recorded division requested in respect of a motion to concur in a government bill at the report stage pursuant to Standing Order 76.19, where the bill has never been either been amended or debated at the report stage, shall be deferred in the manner prescribed by paragraph B. H, for greater certainty, this order shall not limit the application of Standing Order 45-7. I, no dilatory motion may be proposed after 6:30 p.m. J, notwithstanding Standing Orders 81-16B and C and 81-18C, proceedings on any opposition motion shall conclude no later than 5:30 p.m. on a sitting day that is designated for that purpose, except on a Monday when they shall conclude at 6:30 p.m. or on a Friday when they shall conclude at 1:30 p.m. And K, when debate on a motion for the concurrence in the reports in the standing joint or special committee is adjourned or interrupted, the debate shall again be considered on a day designated by the government after consultation with the House leaders and the other parties, but in any case not later than the 20th sitting day after the operation. Debate. The Honorable Government House Leader.
The Honourable House Leader is inaudible.
ask the House to come back to order. I will take one point of order. The honourable member for Carleton. A brief point of order, of course.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It would have been a lot briefer if I'd been allowed to finish it the first time. The member earlier today, the member was rising on a point of order with respect to the procedures of the government in its presentation of the estimates. Those estimates are currently before the House. You stated in your multiple interruptions of his point that the matter was not
order. I'd ask the member to make his comments, of course, concisely and obviously with respect to rulings of the Speaker. The honourable member for Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, you indicated that the matter was not before the House. The matter is before a parliamentary committee, the Government Operations Committee, which is a creature of the House of Commons. Right. The matter has been presented, literally, the estimates were literally tabled in the House of Commons, right here, across from me, by the President of the Treasury Board. In other words, the matter is very much live, and it is very much appropriate for the member to raise a point of order with respect to it. Now, I know that member probably has some policy objections to items in those estimates. But I didn't hear him make any of those objections because he was focused exclusively on the procedural element and on the standing orders and the traditions and conventions that date back hundreds of years when he was making his case. So it is not accurate to suggest that he was engaging in debate. There was no debate whatsoever about the policy substance of the estimates. His point was exclusively about whether or not those estimates provide enough information for Parliament to carry out its legitimate duty in executing the power of the purse.
Oversight.
The most fundamental rule of public finance in our parliamentary system is that the government cannot spend what Parliament does not approve.
Exactly.
And the member was making a point of order specifically on whether or not the presentation of the estimates, which gives authorization for any non-statutory spending, was done in the proper form. That is very much a point of order. Now, we're talking about the expenditure of $7 billion, Mr. Chair. The honourable member chose a quiet Friday out of respect for the work of Parliament in order to raise this issue. It seems to me that he has taken the least disruptive possible approach to making his procedural case on this point. He was in the process of making that case prior to the chair entering Parliament into orders of the day. We, as all parliamentarians, should hear this argument, and we should hear it in its entirety. Now, it is not reasonable to expect that he could make
order. I thank the member for Carleton. I think that he's aware that it is at the Speaker's discretion when the Speaker feels the Speaker has heard enough. He will also know that I have made a ruling that I have heard enough on the subject and that I will come back to the House if necessary. But I want to point out to him what is said. It's at page 338 of House of Commons Procedure and Practice, which says, under the standing orders, a brief presentation of arguments on the point of order is possible at the Speaker's discretion. And there are many, many precedents where a Speaker has indicated that he has heard enough in terms of the arguments. Members may have various reasons for trying to take up time or make arguments, and that may be. But the point is that I have made a ruling, and of course, as the member for Carleton probably knows, that the chair cannot be challenged except through a motion. Now, there may be that may come at some point or not, but the point is the member appears to be challenging a ruling of the chair. Perhaps he doesn't intend to do that, but that's the impression I'm getting, and of course that's not appropriate. And so I have heard enough, as I've indicated, and so we'll continue with debate. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to continue, Bill C-76, the Elections Modernization Act. This bill strengthens...
Order. 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 The member for Elmwood Transcona indicates that he has a separate point of order on a different subject.
I do, Mr. Speaker. This point of order is with respect to the timing of raising points of order about the estimates. Now, you rightly have presented some arguments about general points of order, but I would like to put on the record another passage from a previous speaker who addressed the issue.
Order. The member for Elmwood-Transcona must understand that I'm not presenting arguments. The Speaker makes a ruling. I've made a ruling. He, again, appears to be challenging the ruling. I regret that he doesn't like the ruling, but the only manner to challenge a ruling is through a motion, and the Speaker does not challenge in this fashion. And it is the custom in this House that one person stands at a time, and I would ask him to take his seat, as is required by the standing orders. If he wishes to be heard, he may not be heard for some time. It may be difficult to recognize him if he does not take his seat and come to order. The honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona will come to order. The member for Elmwood-Transcona will come to order. Order. You may not hear from the member for a while if he continues like this. Order, 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 debate. Order. The Honourable Government House Leader. On a point of order.
Speaker, and to continue, C-76.
No.
Order. Sorry. He meant opposition, House Leader. Mr. Speaker, I think we do need some clarification on this, and that we had not gone to orders of the day. We were dealing with the member from Elmwood-Transcona's point of order, which you had asked him to, you cut him off. Then I brought in my intervention. Then the member from Carleton rose on a separate point of order. You didn't recognize him because, for whatever reason, and then you moved to orders of the day, but then clearly you came back and stopped orders of the day and went back to the member from Carleton's point of order, which should have actually been heard before orders of the day. So there does seem to, because of, and I understand absolutely sometimes there was a lot happening here, but I do think that, that procedurally, I think we need some clarification on how he should have been recognized and been allowed to speak before we went to orders of the day, and instead you went to orders of the day, and so now I think we have a bit of a situation on our hands that will need to be rectified. Yeah.
Thank the Honourable Opposition House Leader for her point of order. As I said previously, and it's very well established, that it is at the discretion of the Speaker to determine when he feels or she feels they've heard enough of an argument. As it turned out, in fact, the point of order from the Honourable Member for Carleton was, in fact, in my view, on the same topic. I did, in fact, start it. Whether or not a member declares them personally that orders of the day have or have not started is beside the point. Orders of the day had been called. It has commenced. I've called for debate. We are underway. Members may not like that. I recognize that. But the Honourable House Leader now, the Honourable Government House Leader now has the floor. Order. I think I've heard enough, as I've indicated. The Honourable Member of Carleton says he has a separate point of order. Now, I anticipate that he will make very clear the topic of the point of order very briefly, so I can determine that it is, in fact, a separate point of order.
Yes. The topic of the point of order is the point of order of members of Parliament. In fact, there were many of them made in rapid succession about 10 minutes ago, immediately before we went into, we appeared to have accidentally and perhaps erroneously fallen into orders of the day. There are about 15 members who were seeking to make those points of order. I ask that they be allowed to be recognized. It is the custom that whenever a member makes a point of order, that point is recognized by the chair. Now, in fairness to the chair, there was a lot of sound at the time, and it is understandable that it might not have been clear exactly which members at which moments were making their points. But now that I've brought the matter to the Speaker's attention, I ask that he give the other members who had been making points of order at that time the opportunity to make those points, because if they are not given the opportunity, there may well have been procedural matters that were not brought to the Speaker's attention, and that could only be brought to his attention if the members making them were given the floor and recognized as is their right as members of Parliament. Now, no one could expect any speaker to be cognizant of everything that goes on in a chamber this size with 300 plus individuals in it. And as a result, it is perfectly reasonable that he relies on members of the House to bring procedural challenges to the attention of the Speaker. And that is why when members raise points of order throughout debate, as they have done for decades or centuries, it has not been seen as an insult to the Speaker. Not far from it. It is merely a recognition that it is impossible for any one Speaker to see every single procedural difficulty that might have occurred. And so I'm really asking the Speaker to allow the members who were clearly observant to problems of procedure and order to rise now and raise those points with the Speaker, and that he have the opportunity to rule on each of those points of order, so that he can, so that the House can have dispensed with all of the concerns that members of Parliament have brought to the Speaker's attention. Now, moments ago, we had a discussion. The member, the Democratic member, for I think it's Elmwood Transcona, was raising a point of order on one subject, and then was compelled to raise points of order on other subjects. So, Mr. Speaker, we do respect your decision that you do not want to hear more at this moment about the issue of Vote 40. But I do believe that the member for Elmwood Transcona had other concerns, other points of order that he attempted to bring to your attention. Again, it was very loud in the House at that moment, so it is possible that the Speaker did not hear him making those points of order, but he did so about 25 times to my inexact count, and I think it would be appropriate to allow him to rise on his separate points of order in order to raise them, and that other members who have raised points of order and did raise points of order at the exact same time be given the opportunity to raise them with you as well. Thank you.
Thank the member for Carleton. L'honorable député de Laurier-Sainte-Marie.
The honourable member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie has a point of order. Yes. Yes, Mr. Speaker. I do rise on a point of order. You read through the motion that will soon be under discussion in English only, if I heard, and at that point there was no interpretation into French, and I believe that it is a right for all members, Francophone members in this House, to be able to hear the text of the motion, which would be under debate in their first language. And so I would like to know, Mr. Speaker, how you intend to proceed to rectify the situation. Thank you.
members rising on the same point of order.
Same point of order, Mr. Speaker. As an effort to always improve my French, I always keep my translation either on floor or on French. This morning I had it on French. I can confirm that I did not notice there was a time that there wasn't French translation. However, I could say, Mr. Speaker, that it was quite loud, and I can understand why the honourable member might not have heard it. But as far as I was concerned, from this side of things, I certainly heard it on translation.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie and the honourable member for Hull-Aylmer. There does not seem to be consensus as to whether the motion was heard or not, so I can refer the honourable member to Laurier-Sainte-Marie to the order paper of today. But if she wants would like some assistance, I would be prepared to read the motion out in French.
The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga has a point of order on a different matter.
Mr. Speaker, on this particular point of order, it was impossible to hear what was being said. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I heard clearly in my earpiece the translator saying inaudible, indicating they were not hearing, so how could they possibly have interpreted for the rest of us?
I thank the member, but the honourable member for Carleton.
I just heard the interventions from our honourable colleague from the NDP, and the member from Hull-Aylmer did concede in his comment that he could understand how certain members would not have been able to hear the original reading of orders of the day. Yep. So even members of the government side are acknowledging that some people might not have heard, so he acknowledges that that's the case. I think.
Order. I must say that it's a little hard for me to accept from the honourable member for Carleton the argument that members couldn't hear me reading the motion when one of the reasons they couldn't hear was him banging his desk at the time while I was reading the motion, which is not permitted in the House of Commons, as he ought to know as an experienced member of this place. The
honourable member for Louis-Saint-Laurent. Yes, on the point of order raised by the member for the NDP and Hull-Aylmer, I was trying to see whether or not we could hear the interpretation or receiving interpretation during the point of order, and I put in my earpiece and I heard nothing coming from interpretation. Mr. Speaker, let's shed some light on the situation. We could suspend for a few moments and we can see whether or not there was interpretation.
Yeah. I do not. I thank honourable members for the arguments on this subject. The matter, I want to refer members, of course, remind members that they can find the motion that I read on page 238 of the notice paper. It is available for members, and and I think I've heard enough on this subject, but in any event, it's 11 o'clock, and therefore it is time for statements by members. Déclaration des députés. The Honourable Member, l'honorable député de Nickel-Belt. L'honorable député de Lorraine-Sainte-Marie, un appel au règlement.
Oui. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you for having acknowledged the serious problems with the Blues this morning in terms of the simultaneous interpretation. It was not possible for the MPs, whether those be Anglophone or Francophone MPs, to hear the motion that was brought forward by the government. Again, whether that was in French or in English, I would ask you then to confirm that at the next opportunity, the government motion number 22 will be read again so that the debate can begin. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the honourable member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie for her point of order. I was informed that the interpreters read the motion in French, and therefore I can determine that the motion has been laid before the House correctly.
Skinner-Bulkley Valley is rising on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm left at a bit of a challenging moment. The primary role of all MPs in this place is to be able to understand what is in front of Parliament so that we can engage in debate on behalf of the people we represent. I've been here, similar to you, Mr. Speaker, a while. I've certainly never seen a Friday like we had this morning. I'm not sure it was the Friday you were expecting. It wasn't the one I was, and I'm sure many MPs. I've never seen the House taken with such disorder. The primary job of the Speaker is to allow for the lack of disorder, as it's sometimes referred in our text, the ability of MPs to hear one another in debate. I did not engage in any of the noise making, but that's irrelevant because I was unable to hear either of your reading of the motion nor the government House Leader's response to the motion, as I'm sure many other MPs. Now, the government House Leader is saying, well, I should have put my earpiece in, which I did, still couldn't hear what was happening, nor is it the responsibility of me as an MP to create that order. That is, of course, your job that we grant you, Speaker, through the election of the Speaker. That was not attained through any point in either your reading or the government House Leader's response. I have great respect for you, Speaker. We've known each other a long time. This place has, from time to time, become quite emotional and quite engaged, as it should. We are meant to represent the passions of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. Yet I find it impossible to determine, having been in the House with an interest to hear what you were saying and the government House Leader's response to the motion, that we had anything resembling order or that I had any opportunity to actually do the job that I'm here to do. So my simple request to you, I think it was a reasonable request from the member from Laurier-Sainte-Marie, yet we somehow are pretending that what happened prior to question period was normal and good orders of the day. I with all due respect, find that impossible to believe. And
I thank the honourable member for Skinner-Bulkley Valley for his point of order. It is, of course, the same point of order on which I just ruled, but I do want to point out that he talked about the responsibility of the Speaker to maintain order, and in fact, the Speaker can only guide the House. The Speaker is, of course, the servant of the House, but to suggest that the Speaker cannot create order without the cooperation of members is not the case. It requires the decision of all members to have decorum here. Behavior of members in this place is up to each of them as individuals. The Speaker cannot control. The best Speaker can do, the best the Speaker, I suppose, hopes to do, is to control himself or herself. Beyond that, it's quite a challenge, as the member very much knows. Now, if I've indicated that the motion is properly before the House, I can draw, as I mentioned before, the member, of course, can read the notice paper and read the motion there if he wishes to see the details of it again. That is available there. And so I would now proceed to tabling of documents. The Honourable Government House Leader is rising on a different point of order.
Yes, it is different in that I do require just one more point of clarification, if I could. What I still don't understand is it was clear before we got to government orders that you had recognized that there were points of order. There were actually a number of them. And you proceeded, though, with government orders. And I just want to know why.
I'm sorry, but the member, again, is challenging the decision of the chair, which can only be done by a motion, right? I have made it very clear. I'd ask the Honourable Opposition House Leader to take her seat, because one member stands at a time. And, in fact, I would wish all members recognize and understand the rule in this House that one member stand at a time. And, in fact, we see sometimes when one member is standing, the other one gets up well before it's really time for the next person to speak. So I asked them to keep that in mind and refrain from doing that, even though members are anxious to be up and sometimes are anxious to get ready for their statement or what have you. But that is one of the important rules of the House, and it's a question of respect for other people speaking, for the rules of the House, that only one person stand at a time. Obviously, members may be leaving and so forth, and that's fine. So I have made my ruling, tabling of documents, introduction of government bills. The Honourable, I don't have notice of a question of privilege. That does require a written notice. We'll take a moment. Thank you. If a question of privilege emanates from the proceedings at hand, it is receivable. So I will go to the honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. My question of privilege pertains to what happened earlier today. Of course, members have a right to raise points of order if they suspect that the proceedings of the House are not in order, and I was not able to. I still have several points of order with respect to Vote 40. I wasn't able to be heard, and in the comments of the chair earlier as well, there was some aspersion made as to what my motives for raising those points of order might be, Mr. Speaker. I think it's a violation of my privilege as a member of this House to be told by the Speaker that I can't continue with a point of order because he suspects it may be a specious point of order. I would try to assure you it's not a specious point of order. But I think because in this case my privilege was violated in this case by comments made by the chair, I think the appropriate thing to do would be to find a prima facie case of breach so that the appropriate motion can be moved and this issue can actually be considered by proc as to whether or not it's appropriate for the Speaker not to hear a point of order because apparently he has views about the motives of the Speaker rather than to hear the point of order and then make a judgment on the substance of the point of order itself. And that's the question of privilege I'd like to raise with you, Mr. Speaker, and I hope you will find there's a prima facie case of a breach so that the appropriate motion can be moved and proc can consider this.
I thank the honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona for raising his question of privilege. I will consider the matter and come back to the House if necessary. The Honourable Opposition House Leader is rising, I think, on a point of order.
To add to my honourable colleague's intervention, I think the other point of privilege that would be concerned about is that the member from Elmwood-Transcona said that he actually had 5 points to his point of order, and I know that you heard one. Clearly, you ruled at that point you felt that it was out of order at that time, and we will accept that. But what of the other 4 points, Mr. Speaker? You ruled them out of order without hearing them in what appeared to be a rush to get to orders of the day, to government orders. The estimates process is nothing to dismiss so quickly. So I think it is important that we do hear these other points of order rather than rush to government orders. They are valid, or they would need to be heard before you would be able to rule whether they are valid. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Opposition House Leader. I want members to remember, of course, that the ability to raise points of order is not an unlimited right of some sort. And in fact, as I've said a number of times this morning, the chair has the responsibility to exercise discretion in terms of when the chair feels he's heard enough. So that's what I did. But as I said, I will come back to the House, if necessary, in relation to the question of privilege raised by the honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona. Introduction of government bills. Statements by members. Reports from interparliamentary delegations. Presenting reports from committees. The Honourable Member for Kitchener.